Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, coming to you from Arctic Norway, talk about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today I want to talk a little bit about media, art that disturbs us and why we might find this material appealing. There's been a few catalysts for this video. I've been thinking about it for a little while. One of them is that one of the original inspirations for this YouTube channel was a blog that I used to read a lot years ago originally it was called I Read Odd Books, and then it was called Odd Things Considered by Anita Dalton. She has also published a book which is a collection of material that she wrote on this blog. And Anita was always very attracted to quite strange, weird material, but it's skewed, often very disturbing. And I got to know a lot of interesting books and media through this blog. I found it really fascinating and compelling. And that was one of the things I had in the back of my mind when I started making this channel, which originally I was going to pretty much only talk about speculative fiction, weird fiction, horror, and maybe horror movies. And I've really kind of expanded the material that I talk about because my tastes are broader than that. But it was kind of one of the inspirations. Another thing that got me thinking about making this video was a guy who has a channel called Goose's Movies. He did a video about the film director Haneke recently, where he was kind enough to also mention my channel. So I watched his video, and he was talking about Haneke and Haneke's films. I have a very ambiguous relationship with Haneke. I really love some of his films, and I really don't care for others. But he introduced me to one of my favourite writers, Elfriede Jelinek, and her books are unrelentingly disturbing, but I love her work. And when I was watching Goose's videos, I was thinking about Haneke and Jelinek, and why is it that we love these creators so much, and why do they find a place in our heart when they aim to disturb us? One of my favourite film directors, Lars von Trier, he's always trying to mess with you. He's always trying to make you feel uncomfortable. And I've watched, I think, almost everything he's made. The last reason that I wanted to make this video was that my next planned video was 10 disturbing songs, because I made a video about disturbing books, and I've seen many videos about disturbing film, but there's fewer videos about disturbing music. And when I was putting this list together, and some of the stuff I was putting on it was really kind of pretty disturbing, and I was thinking I was going to share it with you, share it with my audience. I was thinking, man, do I want to subject these people to all of this really like messed up material? And I had to remember that I shouldn't infantilize you, the viewer. I find this interesting. Why wouldn't you find it interesting? And I thought, let's talk about, do we find it interesting? If we do, why? You know, you go back to the Bible, it's full of murder, it's full of sexual impropriety, it's full of all types of death and disease and horror and punishments, especially the Old Testament. And then you have all of these great artworks that are based on biblical stories. I think, for example, of the iconic painting Judith beheading Holofernes by Caravaggio, or I think of non-biblical material like the Greek tragedies, like Shakespeare's reworkings of these, like Titus Andronicus, for example, or even other stuff like Hamlet. You know, everybody dies in that play, and the entire play is full of, you know, ghosts and horror and insanity. Think about the Gothic, about Edgar Allan Poe, and the way that he has lived on from generation to generation. So even though we're often met with contemporary moral panics about the content of our media and the idea that we're continually becoming more decadent and our work, our art is becoming more disturbed, it's been with us as long as we've been creating artistic material. And I'm going to talk about like 5 thoughts I had about why this might be the case. So the first and maybe most obvious idea that struck me is that maybe extremity is compelling. Maybe we are attracted to extreme variants, extreme expressions of all the human emotions. You know, so you have a weepy like Gone with the Wind. People go to see that to cry, to feel intensely sad, to experience a sense of tragedy and heartbreak. And maybe something like the book Wuthering Heights has the same effect, but in a different register. You know, it's the extremity of revenge, of dysfunction, of jealousy. Wuthering Heights is a novel that people return to, that is, you know, remade into a film every generation, but is actually so disturbing and complex and unpleasant as a novel that the films never, everybody talks about the new movie not representing the novel. The films have never represented the book. The book is too disturbing to make into a functioning film. Or, you know, another book that I thought about, which is also was made into an interesting film, is Crash by J.G. Ballard, which was made into a movie by David Cronenberg. And, you know, this is like an attraction to both eroticism and car crashes and a combination of the two. There's something strange, there's something weird with it, but it's also pushing things to an extreme. It's pushing our interest in cars to an extreme. It's pushing our libido to an extreme, and just maybe seeing something expressed in an extreme form is interesting, is compelling just in and of itself. The second thing I thought about was the concept of the shadow, the Jungian idea. Jung, he was a disciple of Freud initially, and then he set up his own school of analytical psychology. He was initially a psychoanalyst. He had an idea that everybody has a kind of shadow aspect, a disowned, dissociated, disavowed aspect of themselves. Freud might have called it the id, you know, the repressed desires and impulses, but for Jung it was more complicated. It was like our shadow side, the dark answer to all of our positive and more pro-social aspects, and the more acceptable sides of ourselves. And maybe in disturbing art and disturbing media, maybe we find some sense of resonance, or we are able to have some catharsis from our shadow aspect. I think about like A Clockwork Orange, which is supposed to be a critique of violence and teenage gangs originally, but it's impossible in some way not to identify with Alex, who's doing the most appalling things, the protagonist. It's as if we can live out our completely lawless, aggressive side through the character on the screen. The same issue with Scarface. Scarface, the remake, was supposed to be a condemnation, but you know, the number of times I've gone to a barbershop and they have posters of Tony Montana on the wall because they see him as almost a hero, because he's living out this fantasy of machismo and lawlessness. Zizek, the philosopher, said the same thing about Grand Theft Auto. He said that we say that the guy sitting playing Grand Theft Auto is just, you know, in a little dream world, and when he comes back out of the game, he is his real self. But maybe the opposite is actually true. The person he presents day to day has to disguise all of his antisocial, aggressive instincts when he goes into the game, and he can rob people, kill people, steal cars, crash cars. That's an expression of his truer self. I think this is part of the appeal of Edgar Allan Poe. I think that we are scared of our capability of becoming obsessed. We are scared of our macabre interests, and we are also terrified of our relationship to death, and all of these things are disavowed. And Poe's characters, you know, insane, obsessive, murderous, they come back and haunt us again and again because we find some joy, some pleasure in seeing that side of ourselves that we can't even admit ownership of, expressed in his writing. The third thing that I thought about is related but not quite the same, and it is familiarity. I think that we find in disturbing work, some of us find a sense of recognition, we find a sense of familiarity that isn't necessarily just about a darker side of ourselves. Anna Kent, who has a really great channel where she talks about reading, primarily about reading horror books, I'll link it in the description. She talks about this. You know, some people, if they've lost somebody, if they've become bereaved, will avoid books about death because they don't want to be confronted with their own grief. They don't want to be confronted with their own sadness. Whereas when she lost somebody close to her, and she read Pet Sematary, which was all about, you know, death and burial and people coming back from the dead, she found it comforting because it was confronting exactly the issues that she was facing in life. And I think I'm a person a little like that. I think I seek the things that pain me in art because I find some resonance. And more broadly, I think sometimes some of us live with some feelings that we have never had space for. You know, from we were very young, maybe there were things happening around us that just were off, but that we weren't allowed to speak of, or we had a sense of unease. You know, maybe things were frightening for us. The world was an uneasy and disturbing place. And when we meet art and culture and creativity that reflects this in some way, we feel a sense of joy or recognition that something about our experience of the world is being reflected back to us. I'll give you an example of this from my own life. In my early 20s, I was not doing particularly well. I was in a difficult phase of my life, and I went to the Tate Britain for, I think, the first time. And I walked into a room there. The Tate Britain, if you don't know, it's a large art museum in London. I walked into a room and there was a painting on the wall that was a Francis Bacon painting called something like Study for a Portrait. And it is based on the life mask of William Blake. And when I saw that painting, I felt like I was looking at an image of my own emotional state. It was like close to death, it was in darkness, it was distorted, it was unwell, and it just felt like someone had painted an image that was expressing what it felt like if I was looking in a spiritual mirror. And it horrified me to see it, but it lived with me and I always remembered it. When I saw it again some years later, I couldn't understand how I'd had that experience of it, but it echoed inside me in a way that I was never able to forget. And you know, when I first started trying to paint, and I paint, but I'm completely untrained, so I don't ever attempt to paint well. One of the first things I did was I painted a version of that life mask, which you see over here, that was based on the same life mask postcard of that Bacon based his painting on, in a different style, but the same motif. Number 4, to be a little bit more academic or a little bit more psychological, there is evidence from research that we have a cognitive bias for things that unsettle us. That's why the news always gives you horrible news, because it more easily holds your attention. It's why if someone leaves 12 positive comments on your YouTube video and then someone leaves one comment saying you're an idiot, it's the one that says you're an idiot that you remember. We have a bias for negative information because that's evolutionarily how you keep safe. What endangers you or what raises your activation level in your nervous system is what you will attend to. And I think sometimes with disturbing media, it also has this effect. It's like it messes you up so much that you can't stop thinking about it. And in your thinking about it, you kind of become connected to it. This happened to me with the movie Red Rooms. I went to see this with my friend, but she ditched me at the last minute. So I was sitting in the cinema and literally nobody else turned up. I sat alone and I watched this movie. When it was done, I felt like I'd done something wrong. I felt like I'd broken the law. I was so disturbed. I was so horrified. I had a kind of diffuse sense of guilt. I left the room and felt like the guy who came in to collect the trash from the room was like looking at me like I was a pervert. And I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I got up the next day and I regretted having seen it. And then as the week went on, I just kept thinking about it. And by the end of the week, I was like, that's one of the best films I've ever seen. And then I started recommending it to people to see if they would be as messed up as me by the movie. If you get the opportunity to see it, you should see it and then come back here and tell me that you wish you never had. Same thing happened to me with the music of Throbbing Gristle and another early industrial band, SPK. I listened to the first Throbbing Gristle album and it was just noise, it was horrible images, it was amusical, it was unsettling. I hated it and I just kept listening to it and I kept listening to it. And in the end, I was walking around listening to it all the time. Same thing with SPK as well. Early SPK is like Throbbing Gristle, but a little bit more rhythmic. I went through a period of time where I was totally invested in this type of music and sound art. And it's because it did something that I didn't understand, and it made me feel disturbed in a way that kept making me come back to sort of try to assess the threat, I guess. And then I ended up really impressed and excited by it. This fourth one, it also reminds me, of like repetition compulsion in Freudian psychoanalysis, the idea that you repeat your traumas, always attempting to have a better outcome. And I think that disturbing art also has this quality that we return to disturbing ideas, disturbing concepts. They possess us in a way. And through creating that art and through engaging with that art, we in some way try to take control over the things that terrify us. The fifth and final thought that I have is maybe a little counterintuitive, but I wonder if this doesn't also have an aspect of beauty in it. I think about David Lynch. He said something along the lines of terror, depression, sadness, heartbreak, horror. These are all beautiful things in a work of art, but they are poison for the artist. Art, media, creative space, it operates in a sort of dream world where all aspects of life can be made to be beautiful or can become beautiful within the context of the composition, within the context of the work. And Lynch certainly does that in his work. But I think again of that Caravaggio painting that I mentioned at the start of the video. I walked into a room in Rome, in Italy, where they have this painting hanging on the wall. And I don't know how long I stood there, but it's one of the longest lengths of time I've ever looked at a single painting, because it's horrifying, disturbing, violent, confronts you with your own sense of mortality to some extent. You don't only have the beheading itself, but you also have the different ages of the people. There's something almost strangely sexual about the red curtain hanging behind it and the expression on the woman's face, the younger woman. Then you have these threads of blood that look almost like the material behind placed across the neck and the pillow. When I looked at it, I was thinking both about the actual event in the story of the Bible, but also about the studio tableau that Caravaggio probably set up with these people. It's like you can see this as a tent, but you can also see it as his room where he's placed these people so that their body catches the light. Disturbing, horrifying art can have a paradoxical beauty. I would love it if you would tell me some art, some media that has disturbed you, and also why you think it works, why you think it's interesting, what you think is fascinating about it. I've touched on 5 ideas, but there must be many others. Let me know, and please do come back. The next video that comes out, I'm not sure exactly when, but that will be when I start talking about these disturbing songs that I've been kind of collecting and thinking about the past couple of weeks. Hopefully I'll see you there. Thanks very much for now, and hope to see you soon.